Hey folks, The Critical Drinker is built on Strawmen. That's a bold claim, innit? Allow me to explain who this guy is and precisely what I mean when I say that. The Critical Drinker is a YouTuber and film reviewer who has a lot to say about modern Hollywood and its failings. In the broad strokes, I mostly almost agree with the general idea that he's putting forward. It's absolutely undeniably true that a lot of modern Hollywood movies, particularly franchise movies, are in a bit of a creative rut at this point in time and have put out a lot of soulless garbage, I suppose you could say. Now, of course, it's pretty much delusional to call this simply a modern Hollywood issue like he does, but that's a discussion for another day. Just remember that for every one of your beloved childhood films, there's a Friday the 13th Part 6 and a Star Wars holiday special. The hell are you doing here? When I say this channel is built on Strawmen, I mean that when TCD reviews a film, particularly one he disliked, he's incredibly likely to pick out a particular scene, character, or plot point that he disliked and envision a really dumb reason that the director may have included it, then move on as though he's made some substantial critique, arrogantly assuming that his little fan fiction is canon to the events of the film. This additionally carries into his responses to arguments and disagreements within the community. It's possible that when he does this, the element that he's laser focused on has issues that deserve to be called out or critiqued, but by the end of his review, he's poisoned the well, yes, I see the irony, to the extent that now millions of people are walking around with a completely bizarre, misshapen perspective on why the problem exists in the first place. I give all this preamble to say that when I call out some glaring error in the drinker's commentary, you would be embarrassingly mistaken to assume that I'm giving some wholesale defense of the media. I'm going to criticize his misrepresentation of the fight choreography in Echo. This does not mean that I liked the fight choreography in Echo. If any of you dorks drop down to comment, the MCU is bad, actually, cuck, we're all gonna know that you didn't listen to a single word that I said, and hopefully safely assume that you can't think for yourself. Don't be that person. To start this off, let's come up with some uncontroversial example so that you can see exactly what I mean when I start pointing out examples of this in Will's own work. Let's imagine for a moment a film reviewer critic that strongly dislikes movies with unlikable protagonists. And let's then imagine that this reviewer, this critic, is producing a review of 2000's American Psycho. You can imagine that this reviewer might say something to the effect of, "The writers are clearly incapable of writing a likable, relatable protagonist, so instead we're given this obnoxious asshole who, shocker, is a toxic white male." Maybe there is a substantive critique to be made about Patrick Bateman's portrayal in that film, but I hope it's obvious to you that this reviewer isn't the person making it. Someone who read or watched this review is likely to walk away with the perspective, wow, I guess American Psycho really failed to deliver. Must be a shitty movie. The Critical Drinker makes virtually this exact same mistake in his frankly embarrassing review of Ari Aster's Midsommar, a film that he proclaims to be the worst of 2019. His entire review is laced with repeated instances of him calling Florence Pugh's Dani an unlikable lead who doesn't grow out of her personal failings by the end of the movie.
The movie kicks off in dramatic fashion by introducing us to our main character, Dani. She's an annoying, emotionally needy college student. Flash forward 6 months and Dani's still sad and needy. Oh, get over it already. An interesting main character who goes on a powerful journey could perhaps have redeemed this film, but Dani is a complete wet rag. She's sad and distant and kind of unstable, and that's pretty much how she stays throughout the film. There's no redemption, no growth, no revelations.
To anyone who actually watched the film, including, it seems, his fans, this is fucking obvious. No shit, Dani didn't grow. It's an entire film about her being indoctrinated by a cult. You may as well be pissed off at Joker for not having a tacked-on redemption arc at the end. TCD's viewers who didn't watch the movie have now walked away with the perspective that Midsommar tried and failed to give us a likable protagonist and that it must therefore be a bad movie. Again, I'm not saying that there's no discussion to be had about whether or not Midsommar successfully used Dani's character traits to flesh out and further its themes, but it seems clear to me that it's impossible for Critical Drinker to have this discussion if he doesn't even know what the themes are. He's done the equivalent of watching A New Hope and complaining about the fact that it did a terrible job of making Han Solo the main character. But, I mean, it is real easy to shit on a movie for failing to do something it actively tried not to do. Put a pin in the Midsommar review, we're going to be coming back to it. He obfuscates in a very obvious way in his video on Marvel's Echo, where he criticizes poor fight choreography over footage of a fight scene deliberately slowed down to make it look worse.
When it comes to casting roles like this, you usually have to choose between fighters who can't act or actors who can't fight, but unfortunately Alakwa Cox can't seem to do either. She's slow and clumsy in the fight scenes, and it's very obvious the stuntmen are having to do most of the work.
I didn't particularly enjoy this fight, but you would think that an honest reviewer would be able to show you the actual footage and give their thoughts on it and leave the rest up to you. Instead, he seemingly doesn't have faith that his critique will stand up to scrutiny, so he stacks the deck in his favor. Sure, the Echo choreography isn't amazing, but it's not really bad enough to make the average Joe recognize it for the awful garbage that it is, so we manipulate the footage a little bit, give ourselves some extra leeway. For a smaller example, in his video, Was Anakin Skywalker Really a Mary Sue?, he presents an unpopular tweet referring to Anakin Skywalker as a Mary Sue. In popular discourse, a Mary Sue often refers to a character who is so incredibly overpowered that they're able to solve seemingly insurmountable problems with minimal difficulty. You may reasonably consider that to be an incomplete definition, but I can assure you that's how the average person thinks of the term. The drinker responds with the following.
Ah yes, that famously perfect protagonist who wins at everything, always makes the right decisions, has a selfless and compassionate personality, and is universally loved and respected by everyone.
You are on this council, but we do not grant you the rank of master.
I love you!
Liar!
I killed them all.
Do you see what he's done here? I can almost guarantee you that this Twitter user, when they called Anakin a Mary Sue, were not referring to the fact that he's a perfect, unchallenged hero. They probably meant that he's shown time and time again that he's able to solve incredibly difficult problems either with extreme raw power or unbelievable luck. This doesn't necessarily mean that he's a Mary Sue, but no matter what other arguments the drinker makes in this video, he's already set up a fake opponent to knock down. No matter how good or bad his follow-up points are, the subject of his response is incapable of winning because he's assumed the dumbest possible version of their argument and then just rolled with it. Of course, this directs his audience to do the same. If he were confident in his positions, he would be able to destroy his opponent without misrepresenting their position. He could even criticize this person's seeming misunderstanding of what a Mary Sue really is, successfully calling them out on an actual mistake. But alas, we don't live in that timeline. Returning to Midsommar for a moment, several moments, TCD criticizes the film's characters for consistently making bad decisions that put themselves in unnecessary danger. And then he just leaves the critique there, as though he's successfully called out Midsommar on some sort of massive failure of storytelling, comparing it to shitty slasher films.
You know how all those old school slasher movies intentionally made their characters dumb and unlikable so you wouldn't feel bad when they got killed, but then it became a total cliche and people generally stopped doing it because it was obvious audience manipulation? Well, could someone please tell that to Ari Aster? He needs to hear it.
What he misses, however, is that the cast's poor decisions throughout the film are actually an attempt to deliver a message that I think he and his followers would probably agree with. Will specifically points out a scene in which the main characters witness some cult members bashing in the brains of one of their elders as the point at which they should have packed their shit and left.
Then some old people throw themselves off a cliff and one of them gets his fucking face smashed in with a warhammer. Now this is probably the point at which normal people would realise that all is not well with this place, and that it would be a good idea to gather up your gear, make some polite excuses, and leave.
What he's blatantly ignoring about this decision is that it was intentionally made to point out the toxic effects that culture shock and social pressuring can have on a person, especially a foreigner. These people have been invited by a trusted friend to partake in a cultural heritage that is very much not their own, and they're expected to respect the beliefs of their host. They're told, this brutality is a part of our heritage, and essentially shamed into shutting up. No shit they made bad choices. The entire purpose of this film is to explore ways to make people make bad choices. Maybe you don't like that, but if you actually had substantive critiques of this film, you'd be able to make them without first misrepresenting its events. TCD continues by complaining that Midsommar somehow fails to reincorporate its setup, that being the death of Danny's family, into the rest of the story. Specifically requesting that maybe the cult should have orchestrated all of these events beforehand in order to facilitate some dramatic reveal. This, beyond being, I think, kind of an embarrassing fanfiction that would needlessly convolute the movie, in my opinion. This is also a demonstration of his seeming inability to understand subtext. The movie uses this event to fuel literally every second that Dani's on screen. She's uniquely affected by the cult's violent actions because they trigger her still fresh grief, increasing her emotional vulnerability and desperation for some shoulder to cry on, something that her boyfriend is becoming increasingly unable to provide. The loss of her parents and sister then catalyze her indoctrination into the cult, as her desperation to replace the family she lost causes her to overlook red flags and put blind trust in what she sees as now her only shot at mutual loyalty. He also, if you'll believe it, misinterprets the film's ending, claiming that the narrative frames what happens to Dani's ex-boyfriend as a good thing, as though it's just punishment for this toxic white man.
And why does this movie act as if Christian somehow deserves what happened to him? Like his death is justified retribution for what he did? Because I'm pretty sure if you reversed the genders here and showed a previously faithful, patient and supportive woman being drugged and coerced into having sex that she didn't particularly want, then being condemned to burn to death by her jealous boyfriend, people would not be singing the praises of this movie in quite the same way.
But simply, he's full of shit on this front. No. The movie does not frame this act of mass murder as a good thing. Midsommar doesn't have a happy ending. This is both obvious from the awful screams echoing from the cabin to Dani's horrifying stare directly into the camera. It's also double, triple, quadruple obvious because Ari Aster has done this before. Literally 1 year prior, his supernatural horror film Hereditary ends with a whole lot of characters real happy and successful, but nobody in the audience didn't realize that this was the worst possible outcome. This kind of error, though, is exactly why I think it's so important to criticize this tendency. The Critical Drinker is, in many, if not most, of his reviews, selling you a narrative. Beyond the whole modern Hollywood sucks shtick that I don't really object to all that much, he's also trying to sell you on the idea that modern Hollywood has a bone to pick with straight white men and that they should feel threatened by this fact. At the end of the day, I don't especially care if a viewer walks away from his review deciding not to watch Midsommar because they think it's going to be a bad film, but I do care if they think it's further proof that modern culture is out to destroy white men. Once you've made enough of these dipshit reviews, you've reached a point where legions of fans can point out 50 different examples of anti-white, anti-straight, anti-male movies without having seen a single one of them. All because one guy doesn't know how to interpret theme. And yes, I watched his response to criticism on his Midsommar video, and unsurprisingly, it also uses the weakest possible arguments against him. At one point, he actively lists what he thinks the themes of the film are, and just misses a bunch of them. He doesn't even know.
It's a slow-paced psychological horror film about a group of people in an isolated location that deals with the following themes: a relationship breaking down, betrayal by a significant other, the loss of mutual friends, grief and sadness, escape from a toxic relationship, and moving on.
Let's look at another example. Overall, TCD's review of Across the Spider-Verse is fine. It's nothing magical, it's nothing groundbreaking, but it's mostly one dude's feelings about a movie, and who am I to disparage a man's feelings? But then he goes on this weird tangent into Peter B. Parker's masculinity, lamenting the fact that the only straight white male character in the movie isn't treated with the special care that he deserves.
Also, I can't shake the feeling that the script is doing everything in its power to play down Peter Parker, like it's afraid the audience will somehow start rooting for him over Miles if he's shown to be too capable and confident, while the second film morphs him into a bumbling, hapless father in a pink bathrobe. Is this some weird attempt to mock and belittle the Spider-Man that most people know and love, who incidentally just happens to be the only straight white man in the entire movie? I don't know, man, it just kind of leaves a sour taste in my mouth, that's all.
So let's think about this for a moment. In the middle of his Spider-Verse review, Will complains that the film didn't handle Peter B. Parker perfectly. Fine. I felt pretty similar. He then proposes a possible reason for this, that being the filmmaker's specific distaste for heterosexual white men, and accepts that as the most probable solution, moving on. Just like that, his core audience has been convinced that Spider-Verse is yet another example of the anti-male agenda. But let's think of some other possible solutions to this problem, shall we? Spider-Man is famous for being constantly depressed and under duress, never able to achieve the life that he so obviously deserves. It's only natural that when he finally reaches this point, we'll see a different side of him. Unsurprisingly, that side is giddy, talkative, excitable. Is it possible, perhaps, that maybe this movie is actually trying to endear us to this character? It certainly makes more sense to me than Sony simply wanting to knock men down a peg. But hey, maybe they just felt like they needed more comic relief, something that Spider-Man is famous for. Maybe a million different possibilities. I don't know why Sony handled the character the way they did, but TCD simply takes his narrativized version of events as essentially fact. He creates yet another Strawman, knocks it down, and celebrates another victory. Take Black Panther Wakanda Forever as another example. In this review, the Critical Drinker complains that Angela Bassett's character, Queen Ramonda, lectures a room of white UN representatives.
Skip forward a year or so, and all is not well in the Kingdom of Wakanda. Queen Ramonda attends a meeting at the UN to lay the smackdown on some toxic white males. Because, of course, what other demographic could they possibly be?
This is already a gigantic fucking stretch, but even if it weren't, it's sure inconvenient that this movie includes a far more significant scene of the same character lecturing a room of black people, directly targeting a black woman, no less.
Where is her treacherous husband now? But in a place where she can visit if she wished. Mine! It's with the ancestors!
For some bizarre, unknowable reason, TCD counts Ramonda's unkind treatment of some white guys as evidence the film has a problem with white guys, but when she's unkind to some black people, that's just another normal scene. Here, again, we see the straw man at work. He invents a problem with the film, one that makes legitimately no sense, dismisses it as bad, and then carries on as though he's not lowering the collective IQ of moviegoers at an astonishing rate, contributing to a narrative that one literally has to obfuscate to maintain. In his video, Why Modern Movies Suck, They Hate Men, Part 1, the drinker makes several arguments, but one of them stuck out to me more than the rest. He evidences his claim that modern movies hate men by listing several established male characters that have been brought back in sequels and reboots as a shadow of their former selves.
Remember all those awesome, heroic male characters that you liked when you were growing up? Well, forget about them because they were never actually heroes in the first place, and modern Hollywood is determined to prove it to you.
Essentially, he's arguing that Hollywood hates men so much that they have to denigrate them repeatedly in order to make way for new, more diverse leads. What he glaringly misses, however, is that since men are the leads of almost every popular action franchise, any sort of trope that affects the genre is going to disproportionately affect male characters. This trend of an older character serving as a reluctant or past prime mentor to the new lead is so prevalent that it appears in films like Harry Potter, Kung Fu Panda, The Hunger Games, Top Gun Maverick, and of course, the wokest of them all, Empire Strikes Back. Maybe there is some deep-seated anti-male bias in here somewhere, but the Critical Drinker has made his case so badly that his entire video on the subject has taught us nothing. Whenever you deign to call a person sexist for disliking virtually every modern female character, they're liable to fall back on two particular women that they seem to like quite a bit, those being Ellen Ripley and Sarah Connor.
Consider Sarah Connor from the Terminator franchise, and I mean the real Sarah Connor, not this.
Okay, does it not get a bit old to people like this, that every single time that they're asked to bring up an example of a strong female character, it's freaking Sarah Connor from Terminator or it's Ripley from Alien? Does it not get old realizing that you've got two examples that you keep coming back to? It would be a lot more, your point would be a lot more convincing if it wasn't that like super easy for people to predict which person which two people, I guess, you're going to talk about in your video about it. The reason I bring this up is because the very trope that the Critical Drinker complains is affecting men also happened to one of these ladies. In 2019's Terminator Dark Fate, Sarah Connor returns to the franchise as a shadow of her character in Terminator and the vastly superior T2. She's, as far as I can tell, because I can't bring myself to watch this movie all the way through, one of the most thorough examples of character assassination that exemplifies almost every trope that TCD complains about happening to male characters. In summary, he's angry about a supposedly misandrist trope that's been a part of the genre since day one, ignoring the statistical reason for its disproportionate impact, and the obvious counter-evidence that this trope applies to women whenever the opportunity presents itself. I know he's seen this movie because I've watched his review and this connection doesn't come up once. Maybe he thinks these arguments are unconvincing or insufficient in proving his point wrong, but he hasn't contended with them. once again, his criticism is reduced to near worthlessness because he's contending with the weakest possible version of his opponent's points. The Drinker has this interesting habit of incorrectly repeating arguments made by his opposition to his audience. It's something that we saw in the Mary Sue video, but I think one of the wildest examples of this happens in his video about the sudden defeminization of women in movies, where he reads Scarlett Johansson's words about her complex feelings about her early Marvel appearances.
Quote, "While Iron Man 2 was really fun and had a lot of great moments in it, the character is so sexualized, you know? She's really talked about like she's a piece of something, like a possession or a thing or whatever, like a piece of ass, really. And Tony even refers to her as something like that at one point. I want some. Jesus, this girl rambles worse than me after a pint of absinthe. Anyway, what she's basically saying here is that she feels the character was treated as a simple sex object in her early appearances, and it's only recently that she's begun to come into her own and get treated as a fully realized human being in her own right, freed from the shackles of sexual attractiveness."
It's almost funny how bad this is. He reads her exact words, the precise claim that she's making, and then says, in summary, she means this completely different thing. Nowhere did she say anything even remotely approximating that she wants to be freed from the shackles of sexual attractiveness, whatever that even means. She said she didn't feel comfortable with her character being treated as an object or a possession. I don't know. Personally, I feel like it would be nice if he put in even a modicum of effort into learning his opponent's positions instead of shadowboxing against fake points and using blatant misrepresentations to further toxify the film critique landscape. So what, do I need to keep going? Is this somehow insufficient in demonstrating that this has been a consistent pattern in his YouTube videos for years at this point? He does the same shit in his reviews of Kenobi, Barbie, Black Widow, Everything Everywhere All at Once, She-Hulk. The evidence that he and his fans use to demonstrate the existence of this nebulous anti-male plot in Hollywood is so weak that I find myself having to desperately search for any possible reason that he could be right, putting in seemingly more effort than he did. Like, after a certain point, do I really have to be the person to make your arguments for you? But okay, this video was not written as a thorough debunking of this supposed Hollywood agenda. It's simply a demonstration that this narrative is built on a house of cards. The proponents of this narrative may be bullheadedly confident, but they have to stretch the truth to a genuinely insane degree in order to defend themselves. And their special little guy, the person I would consider to be the most effective advocate for their beliefs, has proven time and time again that, at least to him,
Not about.
Legitimate film criticism.
It's about sounding.
The message.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe. Bye.